There is an entire political ideology that is intertwined with conspiracy theories and a some type of, like, I don't know, cultural signifier about masks.
It has nothing to do with masks. I have no problem if people want to wear masks if it makes them feel safer. The problem is the masks being mandatory, people who don't want to wear them being forced to. That's where the issue is.
And in California, I just saw that 25% of the infections in California, and California is now like in the midst of an explosion of infections.
Well, just because there's a sudden surge in infections doesn't necessarily mean more people are in danger. I mean, most people who contract the virus don't even show any symptoms. So a high infection rate doesn't really amount to any concern if actually getting infected doesn't actually do anything to you.
25% of those have come in the last 2 weeks.
Well, of course most of the infections happen in the past 2 weeks. Instead of going about and living our lives like normal, and letting the virus spread around and give people a chance to build up an immunity to it like we do with every other disease, the government's decided to cripple the economy and delay the spread of a virus that was going to spread inevitably anyways, without giving anyone a chance to get exposed to it and build up an immunity.
So we've been living with this now for 3.5 months, since the shutdown.
We've had the coronavirus around long before the shutdown. In fact, this isn't the first strand of coronavirus to spread around. The reason it's called COVID-19 is because it's the 19th known strand. Back in 1800s, it was known as the SARS virus. And make no mistake, a lot of the harm caused by this virus has nothing to do with the virus itself. The reason people are unemployed, losing their businesses, going mentally insane is because of the stupid government's overreaction to this virus. It's actually somewhat poetic if you think about it, because viruses themselves aren't what make you sick, it's your immune system overreacting to them.
25% of the infections have come in the last 2 weeks. And this clip gives you a sense of why.
Actually, it doesn't, because A, as we'll see in a moment, the clips he's using are from a completely different goddamn state, and B, there's a multitude of reasons that can explain the surge in the virus, not just the refusal to wear masks.
What number is this, Brandon?
This is number 10.
Number 10. Okay, so this is a compilation of... Oh, is this in Florida?
Yes.
Oh, I thought this was in California.
How do you get the fucking state wrong? I mean, I apologize if it comes across as if I'm nitpicking here, but that just seems like such an obvious mistake that anyone would catch. I don't know whether this is intentional dishonesty, or if Sam just puts that little effort into doing his research. Because let's be honest, both options are equally on the table.
Well, I imagine there's quite a bit about this going on in California as well, actually.
I suppose you could draw that inference, since the problems with mandatory masks are pretty much the same anywhere you try to implement them.
It's going all through these states that are exploding.
Again, these states that are seeing spikes in coronavirus cases could be experiencing spikes for any number of reasons, a lot of which may have nothing to do with masks. And the problems with making masks mandatory exist, well, anywhere you try to make them mandatory. It's not like these particular states with coronavirus spikes are uniquely having issues getting people to wear masks.
This is in Florida. But I think it gives you an indication of basically what's happening.
It may in your case because all the evidence coincides with what you believe, but if you were to look at the big picture as a whole, that is to say whether or not mandatory masks are actually effective, or if they accomplish anything, the data may bear out a different conclusion. And it's not even a matter of whether or not masks are effective, because the official data is somewhat divided on this point, but even if masks really are effective at slowing down or even stopping the spread of coronavirus, that doesn't necessarily mean that making them mandatory is a good idea. So just to kind of establish that from the onset, I'm not necessarily arguing over whether or not masks are effective. I'm arguing over whether or not mandatory masks are effective.
Because in parts of Southern California, in Orange County, they're not doing masks.
Well, they're not mandating the wearing of masks. That doesn't necessarily mean that nobody there is wearing masks. Even in places where masks aren't mandatory, plenty of people still wear them to their own accord.
They just don't believe in it.
Mr. Strummer!
Well, it's not that they don't believe in masks per se. I think that's a bit of a straw man. See, you can agree that wearing masks is useful at stopping the virus or protecting people or whatever, but still be against making them mandatory. For example, I encourage everybody to wear a seatbelt every time they get into a car. There's plenty of data that suggests that your survival odds in an accident go way up if you have a seatbelt on. However, I do oppose laws forcing people to wear seatbelts. My reasons for this are a bit complicated and beyond the scope of this particular video, but the point being is that you can believe in something or think it's a good idea without wanting it to be mandatory.
It's Florida West.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Here is a compilation of Palm Beach County, Florida residents who are giving their public comments about wearing a mask. It's nuts.
Well, not all of them are against masks. Some of them are just fine with masks, but are against making them mandatory. And while the people speaking may not appear to be in the best psychological condition, some fairly genuine points are still made.
You literally cannot mandate somebody to wear a mask.
You can't, because that violates the non-aggression principle. Immediately right off the bat, that's the moral problem with mandatory masks. They involve a threat of violence. There's some sort of penalty if you don't wear the mask. Laws aren't suggestions. Even in places where a mask is only mandated inside a public building, well, there's still a gun involved. You're still going up to that business owner and saying, you must force your customers to wear a mask or else. So before we even get to the nitty-gritty of how effective it actually is, right off the bat, it's morally dubious.
Knowing that that mask is killing people. It literally is killing people.
While I agree this person is being way hyperbolic, there is a point to be made that people with like asthma, mesothelioma, different breathing conditions may find it difficult to be constantly breathing through a mask.
And we the people are waking up.
I will say, if there is one good thing to come out of this whole pandemic, it's an increased public awareness of government tyranny.
And we know what citizen's arrest is, because citizen's arrests are already happening, okay? And every single one of you that are obeying the devil's laws are going to be arrested. And you, doctor, are going to be arrested for crimes against humanity.
You know, I like how he goes after complete whack jobs who give a very extreme version of the opposing viewpoint as examples of people who hold the counter position. It's almost as if he's subtly trying to imply that anyone who disagrees with him is like that.
The problem with humanity today is ignorance, arrogance, and apathy. Keep taking the road of least resistance. Keep listening to the TV brainwashing you from birth.
And they want to throw God's wonderful breathing system out the door. You're all turning your backs on it.
This is true to an extent. You see, the mask does trap some carbon dioxide that you breathe out, and your respiratory system was meant to take in fresh air. So while wearing a mask for a couple minutes to walk into the grocery store, or maybe to perform a 2-hour operation isn't going to kill you, wearing them 24/7, day in and day out, that's probably not going to be too good for you.
Doctor, I really have many question marks about your degrees and what you really know. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't think that you are worthy of your credentials. And I would ask suggestively that you go back to school and get educated.
Ask suggestively?
You can ask suggestively. You can also have question marks as to, things that are going on.
Yeah, I get a lot of question marks.
At least she's asking suggestively and not threatening violently, so in that regard she has an advantage over your precious government.
This is the dynamic that's happening. I mean, this is,
Actually, it isn't. There are plenty of legitimate arguments against making masks mandatory. You just cherry-picked examples of total whack jobs arguing against masks, because it makes it easier for you to discredit your opposition.
And there is a, this is not just QAnon style. This is like sophisticated anti-vaxxer style stuff that's going on.
Do you think there'd be nearly as many anti-vaxxers as there are now if they were optional? See, that's another problem with making masks mandatory. By basically imposing masks onto people against their will, by making it a chore versus something that they want to wear, you're making them sympathize with these whack jobs who spread misinformation, regardless of how effective the masks may actually happen to be. See, making something mandatory gives its opponents a bigger platform, simply because you're going to have people sympathetic with their opinion, regardless of what the data or facts happen to be.
But it's also a function of like this cultural signification.
It's actually a function of civil liberties, first of all, and second of all, human psychology. People just naturally don't like being told what to do, even if it is ultimately for their own good. And as I mentioned before, this is one of the reasons I'm against seatbelt laws. Telling people they must wear seatbelts has the psychological effect where it makes them not want to do it. So you'd actually have more people wearing seatbelts if they weren't mandatory.
Here is Oregon. A sheriff in Oregon. They're having, or excuse me, is this Washington State? Sorry.
I think Sam here may be in need of a geography lesson. This is the second time he's gotten the state wrong. Although I will give him credit, he did get the right coast this time, so at least he's showing progress. I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah, Southwest Washington State, Lewis County.
Southwest Washington State. And Inslee has basically said, we got to do masks.
Now, the rest of you write a 15-page paper about the history of German automobiles in German.
And here is a sheriff. And we're starting to see this a lot with sheriffs. Remember, the stories of of Governor Lepage up in Maine. And, there was a lot of these sort of Tea Party types were going in, the sovereign citizens, saying that it's really the sheriff that has all of the power. The sheriffs have all of the power.
Well, they may not have all the power, but they do have a significant amount of it. See, one of the things that law enforcement officials have is called discretion. That is, they have the freedom to decide which laws to enforce. And this is important because it's part of the concept of checks and balances. That's the idea of each branch of government sort of holding the others responsible, keeping their power in control. In this case, the executive branch, that is the police, have the ability to curtail the authority of the legislature by deciding not to enforce laws that are unfair. This isn't corruption. This is the system of checks and balances working as it should.
In these, the counties are the seat of all the power, and they seem to be trying to assert that. And here is this sheriff. I can't find what number this is.
It's 13.
Yeah, number 13. This is Sheriff Robert Snaza in Southwest Washington State.
Oh, congratulations. You got the state right this time.
Here's his response to Governor Jay Inslee's mask order.
In case you guys didn't hear, Governor Inslee, in his infinite wisdom, has decided after over 100 and some odd days that we should all wear face masks inside and out. Here's what I say. Don't be a sheep.
Boss, you know, boss.
Your support is something American. I think you probably know my boy. I'm going to go up and support him.
Thanks, Rob. Good to see you again, Rob. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thanks.
Hey, how are you doing?
Admittedly, I've never been the biggest fan of police, but watching the cops not only give the government the middle finger, but also openly show compassion to the community, that was genuinely heartwarming to watch. Congratulations, officer. You earned my respect.
And, that sheriff, he's an elected official, and he's got to, he knows his people. He knows his chickens, as they say.
Funny how in this case the police are actually the ones being more responsive to the needs of the people than the politicians. Usually it's the other way around. And speaking of elections, these mask orders and shutdown orders are never really voted for by the people. They're issued by executive order. They never went through a legitimate legislative body. It's kind of funny how the left, who likes to preach about the virtues of democracy and power to the people, never seem to want to criticize this aspect of the lockdown orders.
And they're all excited.
Truth be told, I'd also be a bit excited if I found out the cops were refusing to enforce authoritarian bullshit.
You're a sheep if you wear a mask.
If you're wearing a mask because you're uncritically going along with the dictates of authority figures, then yeah, you're a sheep. If you're doing it because you genuinely feel it will protect you or those around you, that's a different story.
This is...
Is getting through Corona like getting through the Depression or something like that? Like, will they be able to? Are they hoping to have like a war story for like having a very like comfortable existence their entire lives or something?
It's the opposite. We don't want to make a big deal about coronavirus. We want to go about our lives as normal and just let people build up an immunity to it. Larkin Rose points this out in one of his videos, but the virus itself is pretty harmless. The only thing giving it all the power that it has to shut down businesses and ruin lives is from government. I guarantee you if the government didn't lock things down and fuck everything up the way it did, way less people would have died from the virus.
Just can't get into it. I don't know.
I mean, that's really the question is, what is the inspiration for this? What is driving this?
Being forced to wear fucking face diapers in the July heat, the fights breaking out between customers and employees over enforcing the mask mandates, and the potential logistical nightmare of making sure kids wear masks to school in the fall. There's plenty more. I can keep going.
Because it's an outside force.
The only outside force I'm worried about is the government. They've done significantly more damage to people than this virus ever could. If you add up all the suicides and the mask fights and this and that, we'll probably come to find that the hysteria surrounding the virus would actually have a higher body count than the virus itself.
Right? And you would imagine that responding to it in some way.
Well, there are plenty of ways to respond to this pandemic. Washing your hands, wiping things down, avoiding people who are sick, taking your vitamins. These are all things that, well, first of all, you should probably be doing anyway, pandemic or not, but second of all, don't require force, coercion, or big government. Hey Sam, has it ever occurred to you that instead of begging politicians to solve our problems, you actually pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go out there and do something about it? If you think wearing masks in public is that dang important to stop the spread of the virus, then convince people, publish reports and data, get the word out. That's much more likely to get people to wear masks than just forcing them to.
They just cannot stand the collective action.
Oh, I'm fine with the collective action. People take collective action on a voluntary basis all the time. What you advocate for is using force and coercion, which I'm against. Hey, all I'm saying, Sam, is that if you want people to wear more masks, you're going to have to take the initiative to get the word out, sell people on the benefits of wearing masks. That's the only way you're going to get people to wear them. Sorry, there's just no way to shortcut that. And just like Sam has the ability to take the initiative to create change in the world, so do you. You have the ability to take the initiative to support channels like this that produce quality content that keeps the public educated, which is why links to my Patreon and PayPal will be in the description. Until next time, this has been Philosophossum, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.